Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy. Today we're doing a special Q&A writing advice edition to celebrate reaching 50,000 subscribers on this channel. You know, it just seemed like the thing to do. I feel like that's the way to celebrate reaching any kind of subscriber milestone is with a Q&A. That's what you do. That's YouTube culture, right? I really always appreciate it when you guys leave topics that you'd like me to cover in these videos. So many of the videos that we've made on this channel are topics that you guys have directly suggested, but we also don't have time to answer all your questions or get to all your topics, so I'm going to try and answer as many of your questions rapid fire style in this video. So the first question is, do I need to somehow copyright my novels before sending them out to agents? No, you do not. Your work is automatically copyrighted as soon as you write it. You can register for official copyrights, but I've actually heard that it can actually make the legal acquisition process more difficult. I can't confirm that, but I have heard stories about that. So no, you don't need to register for any kind of formal copyright before you start querying. The next question is it possible that the protagonist, by eyes of the reader, can become the antagonist in the end? It's totally possible to begin with a character who is likable, who is heroic, and through a series of events evolve them into someone antagonistic or evolve them into a villain. You know, in television, I think that's basically the plot of Breaking Bad, right? That was basically the goal. Take the good guy, turn him into the bad guy. I love stories like this. I love character arcs where the character gets worse by the end. We've got a video on character arcs, and this was one of the types of character arcs we covered. So it's totally possible, and it's actually one of my favorite things to read. They say to write from your heart, but I'm not a naturally funny person. How do I put humor in my books? I think pretty much anyone can be funny, even if you don't consider yourself like, you know, a great comedic genius. What I think the best way to write humor is to write in what you find funny. I don't tend to write very humorous work, but when I do, it's things that I find genuinely funny. You know, trying to write someone else's sense of humor or trying to write a sense of humor that you don't personally find funny, it's going to be extremely hard to write, but it'll come quite naturally if you're just writing things that you yourself genuinely find funny. Start to take note of funny things that happen in your life, and see if maybe you can pull that into your work. A lot of the funnier lines of dialogue that I use in my writing are directly stolen from funny things that, you know, my friends or family have said. Because a lot of the time with humor, like, it's so good that you can't make it up. What advice would you give for teen writers? Such as how to manage studies, online classes, exams. My first piece of advice for teen writers is to write what you want to write. I meet a lot of teen writers who feel that they don't have the skill to write the book they want to write yet, and so they hold themselves back. The thing you're gonna learn the most from is just writing, and just writing what you want to write. Even if you don't feel like you have the life experience yet or the skill yet, the thing that's gonna prepare you to write the book and teach you how to write the book is actually writing the book. You can come back and edit it later, so don't hold yourself back because you don't feel like you have the skill yet. And then my other piece of advice is to just not put too much pressure on yourself. You know, like you said, you've got school, you've got a lot of things to manage. You can't always make writing the priority, and that's okay. It doesn't make you a bad writer or not a serious writer if you have to take some time off writing to focus on school. That happens. You know, that's the beauty of being a young writer who's still learning. You don't have deadlines, so kind of make the most of not having deadlines while you're there, and just write on your own time in the way that you find enjoyable. I meet a lot of teen writers who feel like they have to write as if it's their job, and they try to write like every day with really high word counts, and they really put a lot of pressure on themselves. There's no need to do that yet. You know, maybe that's something that you have to do when you're older and you're publishing a book and you have a deadline, but you don't have to do it yet. And it's more important that you enjoy what you're writing and you have fun than that you write just like an insane amount of words. Is it okay to start the beginning of the novel with the villain's perspective? You might be looking at a prologue. Lots of prologues begin in the villain's perspective. If your villain isn't like a recurring point of view character throughout, but you want to start with their perspective, you can do that with a prologue. How do you convey emotions of a character without telling? There are a lot of techniques to do this. You know, probably the most common one is to think about how the emotion feels physically for the character and how they actually manifest that in their body language or their tone of voice. I think another really effective tool is to let your character kind of tell without telling, is what I call it. So if your character is feeling sad, rather than having them say that they feel sad, you can let them narrate a topic that has kind of like mournful or sad connotations, but is personal to them. So you probably don't want to have them talk about something very general and broad. But let's say your character's feeling kind of sad and they start thinking about, you know, like a toy they had as a child that was really important to them and that they ended up losing. It's kind of a way for the character to reflect on that emotion without saying what they're feeling. How do you go about making an epic hero for a sci-fi fantasy setting? So if your goal is for your character to be epic and be, you know, someone who's really exciting to watch, you want to think about giving them competencies, but also clear setbacks to their competencies that they have to work around. Let's say your character has a specific type of magic. You want them to be really, you know, good at using this type of magic, but you also want there to be clear limitations on that magic that you then force them to work around. Probably one of the most epic things about, you know, great heroes in sci-fi or fantasy is actually watching them have to problem solve around their own setbacks. You know, what's their kryptonite, basically? In the most exciting scenes of the story, asking yourself how the character can overcome that setback through their own, you know, intelligence or cleverness. That usually is pretty exciting to read. And it's pretty rootable, you know? Watching someone who is really good at something is really exciting. They're much more rootable if they still have setbacks and they're still prone to failure. So the next question, is it okay to modify a character from a story that isn't mine, but I can change and add different aspects to them, and also the plot is very different? Because that character is so interesting, I want to write a character like that too. This is not something I would recommend doing. First of all, it would be really unfortunate if you were, you know, accused of plagiarism, and I also just don't think it's a healthy mindset to be in as a writer, that if you read something you really like, you can just take it, change it just enough that you won't be accused of plagiarism and go with it. You know, I think you won't feel good about it in the end because you'll know that you kind of stole from another writer. It's totally fine to be inspired by another character. Let's say you know, read a character and you think one of their traits is really interesting and you want to write a character with that trait, but I would build the character from the ground up. I wouldn't think about it as just taking another person's character and modifying them just enough. It's a bit of a sketchy practice, first of all, to be honest. I would feel not amazing if someone did that with a piece of my own work. And I think you won't be as satisfied with it in the end because you'll know that you didn't really create it. What is your favorite genre and have you ever written a thriller? So my favorite genre is literary fiction. That's pretty much most of what I write and pretty much most of what I read. I love short stories. I love coming of age stories, and I really like, you know, anything like surreal. I love surrealism. And I actually have written a thriller. My NaNoWriMo novel when I was 17 was a psychological thriller. The next question is, how do you query a duology? Do you pitch the first book as a standalone? Quick disclaimer, I am not a literary agent. I would consider doing further research on this, but I believe that you would probably query a duology the same way that you would query, you know, a trilogy or another series, where you would query the first book, and ideally the first book is fairly close-ended and kind of works as a standalone, but you could say in your query letter that it has what's called series potential. That's usually how you would query a series. Duologies are pretty rare though, you don't see a lot of them. I think there should be more duologies though. I think a duology is a great form. How often do you read a trilogy and you feel like the middle book was kind of unnecessary? Maybe it should have just been a duology. Points for duologies, but that's my understanding of how you would query one. How does Shaylin always know what's going to work for me? It's because I'm omniscient. You heard it here first, folks. Someone asked, how long have you been writing? So I've been writing since I was 8. The age of 8 is when I knew that I wanted to write stories, and I was actually like writing stories by hand and knew that I wanted to be a writer. What's that, like 15 years? But I was telling wild stories ever since I could talk, really. How do I give a unique voice to each of my characters? Their voice is oftentimes just the translation of my own moods and whims. There's a lot to consider when thinking about character voice. It's one of my favorite topics. The technique that I think is really useful is called patterning. So based on your character, thinking about patterns that you can integrate into their voice. So this could even be a pattern of the style of grammar. So a really clear example would be, let's say you have a character who often sets things in parentheses. This would be something specific that just this character does, and so it would kind of set them apart from the others. It could also be in the styles of imagery or even the types of words you use. So if your character has a specific background where they were like a fisherman, you might use a lot of language and imagery related to the ocean because it's true to that character. And another great thing to think of is with tone. The best way I ever heard tone described is that it's the story's view towards itself. So it's how the narrator sees the story. You might let your characters have different tones towards the story. One might view it more seriously, one might view it more lightly. How much information is too much information for the first chapter? Every book is different, so it's hard to define this concretely. I think in the first chapter, you want to teach the reader what they need to know to understand what is important right now. If the information pertains to, you know, the backstory or a side plot, we probably don't need to know right now, because for now the focus is kind of setting up the main plot, you know, working towards the inciting incident. We can set those things up later. So the information we want to know is information that is important to understanding the inciting incident, basically. A great rule that I've heard is the more specific the inciting incident is to the main character, the more information we probably need beforehand. So for example, in Kafka's Metamorphosis, the inciting incident where I think the main character, is it an insect that he wakes up as? That happens in the first sentence, because the inciting incident is very, very kind of universal. I mean, it's not universal that it happens to us all, but there's basically no one on Earth that could happen to where it wouldn't be an inciting incident. You know, does that make sense? But if the inciting incident is very specific to the character, like say it has to do with a specific relationship they have with another character, then you're probably going to need more information so that the reader can understand why this event is important. How do you write a play? Also a disclaimer, I'm not a playwright. I've only written one play in my life, and it's one of the worst things I've ever written in my life. So if you want to write a play, I would recommend researching playwriting structure. And there are softwares like, you know, I've used Celtex for screenwriting, and I believe they also have playwriting templates. So it'll do all the formatting for you. Playwriting is not the same as screenwriting. Screenwriting is like extremely rigid. Like everyone formats their screenplays in this like universally standard way. Plays, it's a bit looser, but there are still specifics to how you're supposed to write a play. And really, honestly, the key to a good play usually, I think, is using the form to its advantage. So understanding, I'm on a stage, what can I do on a stage? What can't I do on a stage? How can I use the fact that I'm limited by the stage to my benefit? Really, I think any form, you know, uses the form to its advantage, and also just has really snappy dialogue. I have a good friend who's a playwright, and she said once that writing dialogue for a play is much quicker than writing dialogue for fiction, because when she writes dialogue for a play, she would write the first draft and almost want to maintain it because it feels natural and conversational. But if she wanted to use that same dialogue in fiction, she'd have to like whittle it down to make it more appropriate for fiction. So I think in plays, don't hold me to this because I've never written one, but I believe the dialogue can almost be like a bit looser to maintain that kind of organicness of how we talk. Someone said, how do you stop procrastinating and just write? First of all is write things that you enjoy writing. The more you enjoy writing, the less prone you'll be to procrastinating it. So if you're not happy with what you're writing, write something else that you find fun to write. The way I think about it is writing takes like potential energy. Like it takes, I think, more energy to start writing than it does to actually write. So what you want to do is minimize the potential energy so it takes less and less and less. If there's anything that you catch yourself using as an excuse not to write, try to find a way to remove it. One thing that I used to find, never for writing but for school, it's like a super small thing, but my brain would go, oh, this is all buried in like my school folders, you know, it's gonna take so long to like open the document. Literally it would only take a minute to click through 5 folders to get to the document, but it felt like it took energy, and so I would use that to procrastinate starting my papers. And so the way I got past that is I would just save the paper to my desktop, so it was always staring at me, and it was like, there's no excuse to not open this and work on it right now. Anything that you find that you catch yourself using as an excuse to procrastinate, try to remove that or find a way to kind of navigate around it. How can you juggle having a unique voice and critics who don't like that voice? There's always going to be someone who doesn't like what you write. In my opinion, I don't think the point of writing is to please everyone or even a specific person. It's to write something that you are genuinely happy with. If you like your voice and it's unique and that's what you like about it, honestly, the fact that some critic might not like it doesn't have to hurt you. It doesn't have to affect you if you don't let it. When you think about it, someone not liking your work doesn't have to affect you negatively in any way unless you decide to let it. So if you're happy with it, if you're happy with your voice, if you're comfortable with your voice, it really doesn't matter what other people think, because at the end of the day, you're happy with it. And I think you'll be happier if at the end of the day you write what you like to write, then if you change it and you write something you don't like as much, to try to appeal to whatever critic. Because you know what's gonna happen? My guess is if you make your voice, you know, more standard and less unique, then there's gonna be someone who says, oh, this was kind of standard and boring, you know, I like more unique writing. The most important thing is you're happy with what you write. Conventional story writing advice is about character arcs, tension, conflict, stakes, etc. Is it possible to write an engaging story that is more exploring a world? For example, I enjoyed reading many Vietnam veterans' memoirs. Isn't it possible to write something similar but in a future world that explores what future warfare could look like, told memoir style, without imposing a save the cat structure on it? What alternative story elements should that story have? Well, right off the bat, I can tell you that I don't know what story elements it should have, because this is a unique piece of writing and only you know what story elements your story has. I'll also say that not every book needs to follow a save the cat structure or a hero's journey or really any type of structure. You know, some stories benefit from that, some don't. You might struggle to find an audience if you are open about the fact that your book doesn't really have a plot and the point is just to explore a world. But if that's your intention and it's what you want to do, I would never tell someone to hold themselves back from writing a piece of work just because it's not conventional or it doesn't follow conventional storytelling rules. There are probably going to be a lot of challenges involved with creating an engaging story that doesn't have a plot and is just about exploring a world. But if it's a challenge you want to take on and it's the project of your heart, then in the end, go for it. If this is kind of inspired by a memoir structure, read those memoirs and ask yourself, how do they apply conventional storytelling advice? So read one and ask yourself, okay, where are the stakes? Because my guess is there are stakes. Where is the conflict? My guess is there is conflict. What is the plot? My guess is there is still plot. It's just told in a different way from a novel. So examine the books that you're looking to for inspiration and ask yourself how you can apply that to your more unconventional book that you want to write. But don't hold yourself back from writing something just because it's unconventional. How do you continue to write after NaNo? I feel like what kept me going was the fear of losing, especially since I lost the last 2 years. How will I continue if I'm no longer challenged? I love my story, I do, but the plot doesn't make sense, and the thought of pushing it away is more sparkly and tempting than the thought of tackling it or even just touching it. If you feel like you work best under challenges, then make another one. Replicate it as well as you can. If tracking your word count and posting it online and having a word count goal is what motivated you, then do that again. I'm sure you could find other people who are willing to do that with you to make it a group thing if you feel like you need that communal motivation. It seems like you've actually found what works for you, and it's the constraints of NaNoWriMo. So just take them into your kind of regular daily writing routine. This is a question that I think gets asked every single time I've done a Q&A on Instagram. This question gets asked, and it's, do you need a degree or diploma in order to write a book? You 100% do not. I think people ask me that a lot because like I got my degree in writing, but that was just like a personal choice, what I thought was best for me. You 100% do not need any kind of academic qualification to be a writer. If you're querying a book, they're not gonna check. You're sent to a lonely island forever, but you can only take one book with you. Which one do you take? So my favorite book is History of Wolves by Emily Fridland, but it's not a very long book. I feel like if I was trying it on a desert island forever, I'd want a really long book. I think I need to stop and observe, look at this for a second. I'd want to pick like a really long book, like Pachinko, or like Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeline Tien, or like, what's a really long book? Or like All the Light We Cannot See, because those are all really good books that I would happily read several times, but they're all really long. Is it better to publish short stories first? My passion is novels, and I've been writing unpublished for years. There are a lot of opinions out here on, should you write short stories first? You have to write short stories first. No, it's not the same, so there's no point. In the end, write what you want to write. If you don't have an interest in writing short stories, you don't need to publish them first or even write them first to be a novelist. If you are interested in writing short stories, they can be a great way to hone your skill. Personally, I do think learning to write short stories will make your novels better, even though it's a different form. It's great cross-training. You know, it can help you build an audience. But if it's not something you have interest in, is it really worth your time? And are you really gonna have much success to write and publish short stories that you don't really care about? There's not a lot of money in short fiction. There's much less of an audience for short fiction than there is for novels. So it's definitely not something you have to do unless you want to. Personally love writing short fiction and love publishing short fiction, but as someone who dedicates a lot of time to doing that, I can tell you that if your heart's not in it, it's a lot of work. The submission process can be really long. So unless it's something you want to do, don't bother. But if it is something you want to do, then I would highly recommend it. I think it's a really great way to hone your skill and also get publishing experience before having to commit to a whole novel. But if you just want to write a novel, just write your novel. Final question is just, have you ever written in a foreign language? I speak French, but not amazingly. I did French immersion all through school, so like kindergarten through the end of high school. So when I graduated, my French was pretty good and could write in French, but it is not like writing in English. I was never at that level of fluency, I guess. So I never really did for fun, and I think at this point, if I tried, my grammar would be basically incomprehensible, and my vocabulary is not amazing. So I can understand French if someone is speaking slowly, and I can read it if I read it very slowly, but I don't think it's ever something that I would try to write or publish in. I think it would just be a headache for me, and the end product would be absolutely terrible. But I definitely admire people who write in multiple languages, and especially seeing people, like, I see a lot of poets who speak multiple languages and like weave them together in their poetry, which is very cool. Thank you everyone for sending in questions. I think I was originally wanted to get through 50 questions in this video to celebrate 50,000 subscribers, but I don't think 50 questions even got sent in, and now that I think about it, this was like less than 30 and we were still here for a while. So anyways, if you do have extra questions, you can leave them in the comments. I'll try to get to them. Thank you again so much for subscribing, watching this channel. If you haven't subscribed, we post writing, editing, and publishing videos every Tuesday and Friday on this channel, as well as host things like live streams and webinars, so you can also check those out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.